Start with our sponsors, and then we'll get into today's Gemara. We're going to do some more about baking today.
Have to wait for
A year of learning, Dr. Paul Koningsberg, in memory of his brother, Dr. Sam Koningsberg, Shimon Reuven ben Labish, and Ed Goldberg's cousin, Nisan Hara Nisan ben Fardosa. Paula and Bob Bromberg, in memory of their dear friend, Julian Smith, Yehuda ben Yisrael. Malcolm Mann, in memory of her family murdered in the Holocaust. Harav Tzvi Hirsch ben Shlomo Yaakov, Sarah bat Ephraim, Yisrael David ben Harav Tzvi Hirsch, Ephraim ben Harav Tzvi Hirsch, Adia bas Harav Tzvi Hirsch, Miriam bat Harav Tzvi Hirsch, Pesel bat Harav Tzvi Hirsch, Shalom ben Harav Tzvi Hirsch, Yaakov ben Harav Tzvi Hirsch, Shmuel ben Harav Tzvi Hirsch. Many friends of Dr. Marvin Blush, Moshe Shalom ben Yitzchak Halevi, friends of Toby Paris, Saratova bat Yisrael Dov, friends of Malka Levi, Malka bat Yosef, friends of Avi Gidler, Avram Meir ben Shimon, Cheryl Scher, her children and grandchildren, in memory of her uncle, founding member of BRS, Dr. Israel Brook, Yisrael ben Harav Akiva, Marcia Federbush and family, in memory of her husband, Dr. Oriel Paul Federbush, Oriel ben Harav Shimon. A week of learning by Minnie Shavrik, in memory of all those we lost in the past year. By Siggy and Lala Bessler, in memory of his father, Dov Berish ben Meshulam Fivish. By Yossi Peleg Billig, in memory of his father, Meir ben Shmuel. By Herschel and Mira Sennett, in memory of his mother, Reitza bas Yitzchak Yaakov, and her mother, Shosha bat Avraham Halevi. Today is the 28th, and there are no days of learning for today. The Shemas have an Aliyah, Kranker Rafia Velti Yeshua Shema Talia, and the Chol B'nai Israel a good Gebench.
Amen.
All right. Okay, so we got over to the top of Lamed Zayin Amud Aleph, right? When we were talking about how thick, okay, is a loaf according to Beis Hillel, because we question whether one could bake an unleavened unleavened loaf that thick, which Beit Shammai, remember, said it was not to be done. Beit Hillel said it was permitted. And Rav Huna gave us an answer. Tefach shekein matzinu belechem hapanim tefach. Okay, that it would have been the same size, or no larger, let's say, or no thicker than lechem hapanim. Okay, right. So the concern was, otherwise it would become chometz. Now the Gemara picks up with Rav Yosef, who's going to challenge, right? Matkif la Rav Yosef. Challenges it, citing the following. Imram Rubez Rizin, if we said, remember that this all was done under the process or supervision of diligent Kohanim, Yom Ruba She'enan Zrizin, what about the people every day who bake their own matzah, the average people, for the holiday? They certainly aren't as diligent as the Kohanim, and therefore how do we know that they're going to supervise it well enough that it doesn't become chometz? So the answer then is as follows. Im amru bepat amila. If we're talking about bread that is well kneaded, yomru bepat she'eno amila, what will we say then about bread that is not well kneaded? Okay, if that's the case. Im amru be'etzim yaveshi, if we say that they're going to use dry wood, okay, which is better, okay, for the baking process. And Art Scroll, by the way, has a note on that, on 37A1, note number 6, if you're interested. Okay, dry wood burns hotter, faster, less likely to become chametz before baking. Okay. Yomru be'etzim lachim. What will we say about their using moist wood? Okay. Imamru b'tanur cham. If we're saying that they're doing it already in a warm oven. Okay. Yomru b'tanur tzonen. What will we say about them doing it in a cold oven? Okay. Furthermore, imamru b'tanur shel matechet. If we say they're baking it in a metal oven, yomru b'tanur shel cheres. What will we say in terms of a oven made out of earthenware? Okay. In other words, the earthenware, of course, takes longer to heat up, and therefore you may have that problem of the chametz
of it,
right?
Becoming chametz, right?
Okay. Amar Rabbi Yirmiyah bar Abba, he says, she'ilti, or she'ilit, actually, et Rabbi biyichud. Okay. Now, Art Scroll wants to say that he sort of asked his personal Rebbe, okay, his teacher privately, okay, right, which is a fine explanation, okay. But the point is umano, and who is it? Ika da Amri. There are those who say Rav Yirmiyah ba Abba Amar Rav, that instead it was Rav Yirmiyah, okay, who said in the name of Rav, she'ilit et Rebbe biyichud, that I asked Rebbe Rabbeinu Hakadosh, okay, right, privately. Umano, who was it? Rabbeinu Hakadosh, right? My pat ava. So he's going to give a somewhat different explanation. What do we mean when we say we're concerned about thick
bread,
okay, loaves? Okay, pat merubah. It's really multiple loaves. That's what he's saying. Okay, va'amai karule pat ava. So why then did they call it, so to speak, thick? Okay, a loaf, right? Mishum denafisha belisha, right? Why? Because there was much more made and needed during the course of the kneading. Okay, you had a lot more dough. Vibayit ema, and if you want, one might say, ba'atre dahai tana, in the place of this tana, lepat meruba, pat avakarula, that when they made multiple loaves, they called it thick loaves. My tama, what's the reasoning? Maybe it's because it was involved in a lot of extra work, right? And that because you had more dough that needed the kneading. Okay, that wasn't necessary. So the Gemara now asks, my area b'Pesach. Okay, so why are we saying, okay, this refers specifically to Pesach? Afilu b'Yom Tov nami? If that's the case, why did we mention Pesach? Wouldn't that be true of any normal Yom Tov, that you had to make extra loaves, had extra dough to deal with? And hachinami, and indeed that's the case, says the Gemara, right? V'hai Tana, okay, says, and that Tan, one who's teaching it, b'Yom Tov shel Pesach kai. We're talking specifically
happens to be
about holiday of making the matzah for the holiday of Pesach. Tanya nami hachi. Not only that, but we have a braita that teaches this as well. Beit Shammai Omrim, says Beit Shammai, ein ofin pat ava b'Yom Tov. That we don't bake again, we'll use a thick loaf on the holiday itself. Beit Hillel matirin, but Beit Hillel seems to permit it. Okay. In other words, the Braita, by the way, notice, does not refer specifically, okay, to Pesach. All it says is B'Yom Tov. Okay. Tanu Rabbanan, a new Braita, okay, is going to give us more information about matzah baking on Pesach.
Rabbi,
Yes.
if I may interject, the matzahs, the Pesach bread they're talking about, is not what we use for matzah on Pesach, but what the real Sfardim use. If you've ever seen it, it's almost like a very thin.
It's like pita. It's like pita.
But it's very thin, very thin.
Right. Right. Thank you, Erwin. You're right. I once had the opportunity to see Yemenite
Yes.
matzah.
Yeah.
It's very similar to that, right?
It's like pita.
Yeah, it's like you have pita or lafa, but
Right.
it's quite thin, right? Right? Okay, so the new Mishnah, the new Braita, I'm sorry, continues and talks about the items that from what the flour, really. Tanu Rabbanan, Yotz'in B'pat Nikiyah. One can satisfy the obligation, right, of making matzah on Pesach and therefore eating it with pat nikiyah. I'm going to call that fine wheat flour, okay? Ubahadra'ah, or with coarse flour. And that, by the way, remember we said could be a reference to barley flour. Ubisrikin, okay? Or maybe we could use srikin. What's srikin? Okay, well, says the Gemara, ubisrikin hamitsuyarin b'Pesach. Or you could make figures out of the matzah. In other words, we have our matzah square, okay, or round, but perhaps it was made in a different shape. Afal pisha amru, even though the Braita says, they said, ein osin srikin hametsuyarin b'Pesach, even though one should not make matzah in certain kind of figures. Okay, the thing that came to my mind as I prepared this was animal cookies. Okay, for kids. So maybe they would make matzah in certain forms, right? And we're going to pick up on this as we now see anybody who's been involved with baking, okay, or selling baked goods would know. Amar Rav Yehuda, says Rav Yehuda, Davar zeh sha'al baitus ben zonin lechachamim. I'm assuming that Baitus, which is a Greek name for Ezra, okay, right? He must have been a baker. Why? Because he asks the sages the following. Mipnei ma omru eno sin srikin hametsuyarin b'Pesach. Why can't you make these matzah in various forms or shapes? Amrulo, why? Mipnei shaha'isha shohe aleha umach mitzata. Why? Because it's going to take women a long time to shape them, and as a result, our concern is that leaven it's going to become chametz, right? Amar lehem, he responded to the sages, Efshar ya'asena b'tfus. It's possible to make them in forms, in containers, in some sort of a I guess what we would call
a mold.
What?
A mold.
A mold, right?
Not
That's
so much freehand.
Right, and a kind of mold, okay? Right.
Well, the lechem hapanim was like in a U shape.
Okay, good point. Okay, vayikva'ena. Okay, and then afterwards one would establish it kivan. Okay, if that's the case. Okay, so right, that he would make it. Okay, in that way. Right. So what happens? Amrulo, they responded back to him. Yomru, okay, then people might say, Kol hasrikin asurin, usrike baitis mutarin. Then other people would say, oh, making the matzah into forms, into shapes, is not permitted, but that is permitted. He would have a corner on the market, so to speak. All right? Amar Rabbi Elazar bar Tzadok, what did he say? Pam achat nichnasti, okay, achar Abba, lebeit Rabban Gamliel. He says, one time I went in along with my father, who was Rav Tzadok, right, into the house of Rabban Gamliel. Veheviu lefanav srikin hametzuyarin b'Pesach. And they brought him matzah in various shapes, various forms. Amarti Abba, I said to my father, Lo kacham ru chachamim, wasn't it that the sages said, Ein osin srikin hametzuyarin b'Pesach, that one is not supposed to make the matzah into various shapes or forms for the holiday? Amar le, he said to me, Bani, lo shel kol adam amru, ela shel nachtumim amru. They didn't say that in regards to the average person. They said it in regards to bakers. Okay? In other words, homemade srikim would be acceptable as opposed to professionals. Right? Ika da'amri. And there are those who say, Hachi ka'amarle. This is what he said to him. Lo shel nachtumim amru. They didn't apply it to the bakers, ela shel kol adam, but rather to everyday persons. In other words, the bakers are going to be more stringent, more careful that their items don't, right, that don't become chometz. Where the average person, okay, because they want to sell them, so they're going to be more stringent. Okay, but the average person may not be as careful. Okay, so that would say that decorated or formed srikim would be permitted if they're from the bakery. Amar Rabbi Yossi, says Rabbi Yossi, Osin srikim kamin rakikin. Okay, in other words, we could make them thin. Okay, ve'ein osin srikin kamin gluskaot, but we cannot make them thick. Okay, right? So that's the question, right? So maybe the implication, Erwin, you might be right, that they don't want them to make a special shape because that would then, because the lechem apanim has a special shape. Okay, now we're going to get into some other baked goods, all right? Anybody who likes donuts, you'll see here the following. Tanu Rabbanan, says the Brighton. Sufganin. Remember, Hebrew for donuts is sufganiyot.
Right.
Okay, so sufganim is like sponge cake. All right. Vahaduv shanin, and we've got honey cake.
Honey cake.
Right. Va'is tarakin, and we've got spice cakes. Okay. V'chalat hamaseret. That's a bread that, right, is another kind of, it's like a pan, okay, right, a cake baked in a pan.
Irish.
Okay, and then we've got vahamiduma, which is a mixture of grains, chulin and truma, okay, pturin min achala. Those are all exempt from taking challah. My chalat maseret, asks the Gemara, what do we mean by this pan, okay, caked, all right? Amar Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi, he says, zeh chalut. He says, what we mean by that, that's bread that's boiled.
Boiled first.
And then baked in a deep fry pan. Okay, only I wonder if that's closer to what we think of as bagels.
Like a bagel.
Right? Shel bale batam, that's done by the householders. Okay? Amar Reish Lakish, halalu ma'aseh ilfishein. He says all of these because they are products of a fry pan. The Rabbi Yochanan Amar, Maaseh Ilfis Chayavin. Rabbi Yochanan disagrees, saying products that the baked goods that are made in the fry pan are subject to being taken challah. V'halalu shasa'an bechama. But these others were baked not in an oven, okay, which is the normal procedure for baking, but they were baked out in the sun, okay? And Art Scroll again has a somewhat lengthy note on 37A3, number 35 there, if you want to see that in more detail, okay? Okay, now, Meitive, but we're going to challenge this with another Braita. Hasufganin, we said, remember that was the sponge cake. Vaduv shanin and honey cake. Va'ista karitin and the spice cakes. Asa'an be'alfas, if they're made in a fry pan. Chayavin, they are still obligated in challah. Bechama paturin, but if they're baked outside of the oven in the sun, they're exempt. Tiyuvtei the Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish. This certainly seems to be a proof text challenging that of Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish's view. Now, Amar Ula, says Ula, Amar lach Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish. He could argue back as follows. Hachabamayas kinan. What are we talking about? Shehirtiach levasof hidbik. We're talking about a situation there where we said basically that it's, so to speak, boiled or fried, okay? And then afterwards, it's attached to the sides of the oven, okay? That's what we're dealing with here, okay? However, aval hidbik levasof hirtiach, mai. But if it was first baked by being attached to the sides of the oven and then afterwards boiled, what's the status? Hachanami de paturin. These also seem to be exempt. Adatani sefer, as was based on what was taught at the end, asa'an bechama paturin. Since it says afterwards, if they were baked in the sun, they would be exempt, right? Liflog. So let's separate this, Velitne, and teach Budida, and teach it this in association with the other by teaching it this way. Bamed varim amurim. What are we talking about? Kegon shehirtiach ulevasof hidbik. Okay, where they boiled it and then afterwards they attached it to the oven and baked it. Aval hidbik levasof hirtiach, but where they attached it to the oven first and afterwards boiled it, pturim. That would seem to mean to make them exempt from chal. However, the Gemara says, chasuri michsura v'hachi katani. Now, something is missing then in this formulation, and this is how we have to teach it. B'med varim amurim, what are we talking about? Shehertiach ulevasof hidbik. Again, that they boiled it, and then they afterwards attached it, baked it into the oven. Aval hidbik ulevasof hirtiach. Okay, but if they attached and then afterwards boiled, ne'esa kami she'asa'an bechama. That way it's made as if it were made in the sun, upaturim, and then it would be exempt. Now, another Braita. Tashma. Listen to the following Braita. Okay, we're still dealing with issues of what kind of matzah can we be yotzei? So Gemara continues with this Braita. Yotzein b'matzah hena. It's permitted, okay, to say that we can have this matzahina, which is half-baked matzah. Okay? Uba matzah hasuya ba'alfis. Okay? And also, okay, we're saying that it can be matzah that was made in a frying pan. Okay? Now, what are we talking about? Hachanami. Here too, shehirtiach ulevasof hidbik. Here too, we can say it was cooked. I'm going to use as opposed to simply boiled, okay, or made, and then afterwards baked by being attached to the oven. So the Gemara asks, "My matzahena." What do we mean by this matzahena, half-baked matzah? Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Shmuel. In the name of Shmuel, Rav Yehuda explains, Kol sheporsa ve'ein chutin nimshachin himena. It's when we break or split the loaf, the oven, the matzah, and strands of dough. Okay, I'm going to use that way. Don't pull apart from it. Okay? Amar Rava, says Rava, v'chein lachmei todah. And that was similar, okay, to the lechem hatodah. Okay, those loaves that accompanied the Thanksgiving, the Todah offering. Pshita, that seems to be obvious, says the Gemara. Hacha lechem k'tiv, v'hacha lechem k'tiv. Here it refers to bread, and here it refers to bread. Mahu detema. What do you want to then tell us? Ho'il ukativ v'hekriv mimena. But maybe because it says, and you shall offer it, as we go over to Lamed Zayin Amud Beis, echad mikol karban. Okay, this is one from each as an offering. Echad, where it says one, shelo yitol pros, that you can't take a piece that is taken in half or broken. Vahacha keman de prisadamia. Okay, and here, maybe we might have thought that if it's broken, it's not viable. In other words, it's not acceptable to be yotzei with that for Pesach. Kamash malan. That's not the case.
Right.
So long as it breaks easily, cleanly, it's not a problem. Okay. Now, Mei Tive will challenge, okay, with the following new braita. And this refers to this machloket that we had between Reish Lakish and Rabbi Yochanan. Now, what do we do about hameisa? Okay, dough that's boiled in water. Beit Shammai potrin. Beit Shammai says it's exempt from challah. Okay, Ubeit Hillel mechayvin. Excuse me. And Beit Hillel says it is still subject, obligated. Right? Now, Hichlita. Okay, here again. What about this kind of chalita, this kind of dough? Okay. Now, we were under the impression when we saw it, right, on the previous example, that chalita was perhaps dough boiled, okay, right, or large cakes. Beit Shammai mechayvi. In that case, if they're large, okay, boiled cakes, Beit Shammai says they are subject to taking challah. Ubeit Hillel potrin, and Beit Hillel says they're exempt. So Gemara wants to ask logically, Ezehu hameisa, ve'ezehu hachlita. If we originally thought that in each case they were dough that was boiled, okay, what's the difference between them? Hameisa, when we talk about that kind of dough, kemach she'al gabe muglashin. We're talking about where they took the flour and they put that into boiling water. Okay? The flour was poured over the boiling water. Hechlita. Okay, that kind of dough. Muglashin she'al gabe kemach. That's where they poured the boiling water on top of the flour. Okay. Now, what difference that makes, I don't know. Okay, to be honest, but maybe somebody who's a baker, okay, or has more experience with baking. David Sheslow, by the way, his father was a baker. So I said to him, I said, he's going to enjoy today's daf. Okay. Right. Rabbi Yishmael Rabbi Yossi Omer Mishum Aviv. He said in the name of his father, Rabbi Yossi, Zeh v'zeh liftor. In both cases, he said this would mean that one would exempt it from taking challah. Okay. Now, va'amrela, and others say, what did he say? Zeh v'zeh lechiyuv. That in both cases you would have to be obligated to take challah. The Chachamim omrim, but the sages say, echad zeh ve'echad zeh. Whether it's this one or it's this one. Asa'an be'alfas patur. If it's made in the fry pan, then it's exempt. B'tanur chayav. But if it's baked in the oven, then it is obligated. Okay?
You know, I know with meat, if you take meat out of the oven, that you've cooked it, and you take it out of the oven, it continues cooking. Sometimes it looks, you have a thick piece of meat like steak or something, you take it out of the oven, and it was red inside, and it continues to cook, even outside of the oven. So I wonder if anything is going on.
Oh, the process of the dough mixing with the hot water. It could be. I don't know. All right. Okay. Have to find out from somebody. Tanakama. So, and as regards to Tanakama, what's his view? How does he understand this difference between what, in one case, Beit Hillel and Beit Shammai say one thing, and in the other case, they say the exact opposite.
That's it.
Right? Ma'ishna ha'me'isa, u'ma'ishna ha'chalita. So, Tanya, what's the difference between whether you say put the boiling water on the flour, or flour into the boiling water? Amar Rav Yehuda, Amar Shmuel, B'chein Amar Rabbi Yehuda. And likewise says Rabbi Yehuda, V'itema Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi. And others say it was Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi who said, K'machloket bazo, kach machloket bazo. The same way they had an argument here, Beit Hillel and Beit Shammai, so they have an argument elsewhere. Okay? What's that? Vitavra. Okay? But it appears the opposite, contradictory. Okay? Tavra actually means broken. Okay? So in other words, you have this distinction between them. Misha shana zo, lo shana zo. Okay? Now, there's one who taught this one, didn't teach the other one. Katani mihat, nevertheless, okay, we'll have that it's taught, b'chachamim omrim, excuse me, and the sages say, echad zeh ve'echad zeh she'asa'an be'ilfes. Again, whether it's this one or this one, if it was made in the fry pan, patur, b'tanur chayav. Baked in the oven, it is obligated in challah. Tiyuvta de Rabbi Yochanan, and then that becomes a proof text against Rabbi Yochanan's view. Amar lecha Rabbi Yochanan. But Rabbi Yochanan might come back and argue the following. Tana'aihi. This is really a machloket Tana'im. The Tanya, because we got a Braita that teaches. Yechol yehe me'isa v'chaluta chayavin b'chala. It's possible one might think that whether it's me'isa dough or chaluta dough, that they would both be obligated in having challah taken. Talmud lomar lechem, but the text says bread. Rabbi Yehuda omer ein lechem ela ha'afui b'tanur, that it's not really bread unless it's baked in the oven. Rabbi Yehuda hainu tanakama. If that's the case, then Rabbi Yehuda is saying the same thing, right, as Tanakama. Ela lav ma'aseh ilfis ika benayu. But isn't it the issue of it being made in a fry pan that differentiates these items from what we'll call for the moment normal bread? Tanakama savar ma'aseh ilfis chayavin. Tanakama must then be of the opinion that something that is, so to speak, made in the fry pan is obligated in challah. Rabbi Yehuda savar ma'aseh ilfas peturin, and therefore we must say that Rabbi Yehuda is of the opinion that if it's made in the fry pan, it's exempt from challah. No, says the Gemara. The kuli alma ma'aseh ilfas peturin. Everyone is in agreement, okay? Both Tanakama and Rabbi Yehuda, okay? That if it's made in the fry pan, it's exempt. V'hacha kegon shechazar v'afa'u b'tanur ka miflagei. And here, it's where they came back and then afterwards baked it in an oven. That's where they disagree. The Tanakama savar kivan shechazar v'afa'u b'tanur, because Tanakama is of the opinion that since they came back and baked it in an oven, lechem karina b'bei, we consider that bread. V'Rabbi Yehuda savar ein lechem ela ha'afui b'tanur me'ikara. And Rabbi Yehuda is of the opinion, okay, that we don't consider it bread unless it was baked in the oven originally. V'kevan de me'ikara lav b'tanur afia. And since in this case, it wasn't originally made in the oven, baked in the oven, lav lechemhu. He's not going to consider it bread. Now, Amar Rabba. Rav is now going to share with us, okay, an attempt to explain further the view of Rabbi Yehuda. My time with the Rabbi Yehuda, what was Rabbi Yehuda's logic, his thinking? Dichtiv. Why? Because there's a pasuk. The pasuk says, "Va'afu eser nashim," right? Lachmechem b'tanur echad, and 10 women will bake your bread in one oven, right? And namely, lechem ha'afui b'tanur echad, karui lechem, bread then that's baked in one oven, okay, namely an oven, is called bread. V'she'ein afui b'tanur echad, if it's not baked in one oven, ein karui lechem, it's not considered bread. So that was his attempt to explain it. Now, Gemara wants to bring us into further discussion about the dough. Yativ Rava. Rava was sitting, V'Rav Yosef, along with Rav Yosef, Achorei the Rabbi Zera, and they were sitting behind Rabbi Zera. V'Yativ Rabbi Zera, Kamei de Ula, and Rabbi Zera was sitting directly in front of Ula, who was apparently teaching the lesson that day. Amar le Rava the Rabbi Zera. Okay, so Rabbi says to Rabbi Zera, who's sitting in front of him, Ba'i minei mi Ula, why don't you go and ask Ula the following shaila? Okay, excuse me. Hidbik mi bifnim, vehirtiach mi bachutz. What about if they attached the dough to the inside? Okay, right. Let's say it was the inside of a fry pan. Okay. Vehirtiach mi bachutz, but they heated it, right? They cooked it from the outside. Mahu, what's the status? Amarle, he said to him, my emale. Okay, what should I say to him? De'i aminale, because if I say it to him, Amarle, he's going to answer me back, ha nihu ma'aseh ilfus. That's still considered something made in a fry pan. Now, Amarle Rav Yosef la Rabbi Zera. So Rav Yosef then says to Rabbi Zera, Ba'u minei me'ula. Why don't you ask then from Ula? Hidbik mi bifnim. If he attached it inside of the fry pan, assumingly, right? Va'avuka kenegdo. And they held a torch opposite the fry pan and tried to heat it that way. Okay? What's the status, Mahu? Amarle, Rabbi Zera responds, my iemele, what should I say to him? De'i aminale, because if I say it to him, Amarle, what is he going to tell me? Rov aniyim osin kain. That many poor people, that's how they heat, okay? Or cook or make their bread by heating it that way. Amar Rav Asi. So Rav Asi, however, now is going to share with us a different thought, still dealing with the issues of dough. Isa, shel ma'aser sheni. Let's say we have dough that's been made from grain that was ma'aser sheni. The divrei Rebbe, according to Rebbe Meir, p'tura min hachala. Okay, it's exempt from chala obligations. The divrei chachamim, according to the sages, chayevet b'chala. It is obligated in regards to chala, right? And we'll roll over just a tiny bit. Matzot shel ma'aser sheni. Let's say we have matzah now that's made from ma'aser sheni. The divrei Rebbe Meir, ein adam yotzei ba yedei chovato b'Pesach. That in that case, okay, remember we had some discussion about bikurim and ma'aser sheni produce, right? So Rabbi Meir holds, okay, that you cannot fulfill your obligation on Pesach with them, right? The divrei chachamim yotzei ba yedei chovato b'Pesach. That one can fulfill his obligation with produce from Ma'aser Sheni. Now, Gemara is going to continue, okay, with a slightly quick discussion of something of a similar nature. Etrog shel Ma'aser Sheni, the divrei Rabbi Meir, ein yotzei bo yedei chovato b'yom tov. Using a Ma'aser Sheni etrog, according to Rabbi Meir, you don't fulfill the obligation on the holiday. The divrei chachamim, adam yotzei bo yedei chovato b'yom tov. That a person, even the etrog made, if it was from Ma'aser Sheni, okay, one can still fulfill their obligation on Yom Tov. And that's where we're going to stop for today. Okay?
Thank you.
We'll pick up tomorrow
Thank you,
a little bit
Rabbi.
more with this
Thank
discussion. Again, coming back to focus on what dough and what not. Right? Okay,
Have a
everybody,
good day,
take care.
Rabbi.
Just
Thank you very
remind-
much. All should be well.
Right, and remind you that again, Professor Price is speaking at 12:30 today. If you listened last night, it was an outstanding shiur and okay, and as well. All right, everybody, take care.
Thank
Have
you.
a good
Be
day.
well.
Have a good day.
You're